You're listening to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. Just a quick heads up before we get started with this episode, I wanted to let you know about a free resource for listeners of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. That means you. If you are planning your next trip abroad, or if you're just getting back out into the world again, maybe you're going to an event or to a festival or to a meetup, that you need to be prepared for what to say when you meet someone for the first time. Download our free Spanish conversation guide so that you'll be prepared to have a conversation with anyone that you meet for the first time in Spanish. We give you a list of the most common questions that you'll be asked and that you may want to ask someone when you meet them for the first time, along with the responses so that you can be prepared when you have that conversation in less than 30 minutes. So to get your free conversation guide, just go to SpanishConversationGuide.com. Simple, right? SpanishConversationGuide.com to download your quick guide to prep for your first Spanish conversation. In this episode of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast, we dive into Caribbean Spanish. We're going to talk all about the historical and cultural influences that have shaped the way the language is spoken in the islands. We're going to do this a little bit differently. We're going to turn the tables, so I hope that you find it interesting. And also, make sure you stick around to the end of the episode. I'll be sharing some information on how you can win a free Spanish lesson. Entonces vamos a empezar. Let's get started.
Bienvenidos! Welcome to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast, the show for Spanish learners that love music, travel, and culture. Close your grammar textbooks, shut down the language apps, and open your ears to how Spanish is spoken in the real world. Let us show you how to go from beginner to bilingual. Here is your host, certified language coach, Tamara Marie.
Hola, bienvenidos al episodio 138. Welcome to episode 138 of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. In this episode, I'm going to share with you an excerpt of an interview that I did with Elle Charisse over at the Speaking Tongues podcast. Now, I like to share these conversations with you guys because you get to hear the tables turned on me. Instead of me doing all of the interviewing, you get to hear me answering some questions, and it really was an interesting conversation. Elle asked me a lot about my earliest experiences learning languages. So we talk a little bit about how I got started with learning Spanish, and she also asked me to give her a rundown of some of my favorite artists and songs, so you'll get to get some more ideas for your playlist in this conversation as well. We talk a lot about how Spanish is spoken in the Caribbean and the cultural and historical influences that really shape the way the language is spoken throughout the region. So really excited to share this with you all. If you want to hear the full conversation, make sure you check out our website, learnspanishconsalsa.com, and just go to /138 for episode 138 of the podcast. And that will link you to the full conversation. The episode was about an hour long, so we did cover quite a bit. So here I'll just be sharing with you just a part of that conversation, but definitely check out the Speaking Tongues podcast as well. There are lots of interesting interviews. They share some really interesting stories, not just about learning Spanish, but other languages. So you get to hear the experience of other language learners and people who have successfully become bilingual or even learned 3 or more languages. So it's a really great podcast. I encourage you to check out the Speaking Tongues podcast hosted by Elle Charisse. So with that, here is a clip of my conversation. I hope you enjoy it.
I'm so excited that you had an opportunity to join me for this conversation. And I'm so excited to learn so much about your languages and your business and your podcast and all that good stuff. So I like to start each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
Okay, so my first language is English. I was born in the U.S. from the East Coast, so that is my first language. I know some people like to say that AAVE is their second language, but I don't really go there. There is some code switching that happens. I learned with my first job that this is you guys speak a different English. But English is my first language. I learned Spanish. I was first exposed to it in school, but as an adult, I really put more effort into learning to speak it anyway. So English and Spanish. I've dabbled in Portuguese. I still think I'm fairly a beginner in Portuguese, although because I speak Spanish, it's a lot easier for me to understand. And I speak a little Portuguese, but I haven't done a lot with it lately. And the last one is Arabic, but I'm a super beginner. I took 2 semesters of Arabic in college, and we really didn't get past the alphabet, quite honestly. And I started picking it up because pre-pandemic, I had planned to go to Egypt, which did not happen. But I am still, I have this desire. It's on my back burner to learn Egyptian Arabic, specifically that dialect. Mm-hmm. So basically Spanish and English, but also aspiring to speak better Portuguese and Arabic.
That's exciting. I think that's exciting.
And Brazilian Portuguese too. So to be
yeah, and that's kind of cool because I think I'm not a linguist, but at least Arabic has a connection to Spanish as well. Did you notice any of those connections throughout your Spanish studies, and whether you were in college or now just picking up Arabic again?
Yeah, so definitely. So my initial exposure to Arabic was actually more of a religious exposure. So I know a lot of the prayers in Arabic, but I didn't know at that time that there was this classical Arabic, right? Which is the language of the Quran. And then there's spoken Arabic, which the dialects of Arabic are so different, Egyptian Arabic versus Gulf Arabic versus Moroccan Arabic, which is might as well be, French Arabic. It's a whole different language. Mm-hmm. That the spoken dialects are so, so different. And my professor for Arabic in college was Lebanese. So I didn't really pick up on the fact that learning modern standard Arabic wasn't very useful in terms of traveling and having conversations with humans. Mm. So, but yes, I think because of my knowledge of history, knowing that the Moors, was African sort of dynasty that migrated throughout Northern Africa and actually had conquered Spain for a time, that whole, not only through trade, through the history of those cultures being so close together, kind of mixing together, that yes, there's a lot of influence. So there are several words that you'll find that are in both languages. So I think that sort of that history of the African Muslims who conquered that part of Europe for some time has a lot to do with it, as well as the trade routes between those areas.
Yeah. It's so interesting. That whole region to me, that whole region to me is really fascinating because there's so much culture, and I don't know if saying mixed up is too reductive of a description, but I think it's just I wish we learned that in elementary school. And I didn't learn that until I was much older.
All of those things I learned on my own. I took Arabic in college just because I went to Howard University my first year of college. Mm-hmm. And it was offered there. And at the time I was a practicing Muslim, and I thought, it'd be really cool to know some Arabic. And I didn't really learn most of what I know about history and culture from school. It was mainly through my own study, learning